sort of follows a complicated number of years of my life where I worked in a bar. I offered a cup of tea to a stranger, and a series of events that sort of played out from that. Basically, it's a show about harassment, a show about stalking. It's very autobiographical to me. And yeah, it basically follows the 6 years from that cup of tea to how, and it got to, I won't do any spoilers, but it got crazy. It got to a crazy level. Yeah.
So it was a real encounter with one person, and it's that one person that takes the story on its way.
Absolutely, absolutely, and so yeah, it sort of tracks. You know, it was quite hard because at Edinburgh Fringe, when you do a show, you only get an hour, and I had to condense 6 years of my life really into 1 hour. So it moves at quite a lick, and so I sort of do key scenes, shall we say, key moments, and I sort of give them in quite a quick burst, and it sort of moves quite quickly from traumatic incident to traumatic incident. So yeah, and it was a crazy time.
But it's funny as well. So, I mean, it's obviously quite a sinister idea, being stalked and harassed.
Yes.
How do you get the humour into it?
Well, you know, it's funny because I come from a comedy background, because my previous work was comedy. I never really wanted to set out to do a comedy show with this because the subject matter is quite... you know, it's quite tricky, and it's not just about me, it's about someone else, and it's about this sticky, awkward situation. It felt untrue to just make it just funny. Yeah. So the humour just comes from like the madness of the situation, the sort of the craziness of how sometimes as it was happening to me, I would think, how is this happening to me? How has it got to this level? And I suppose the comedy comes from the sort of disbelief as it happens.
How is this different then? I mean, were you a comic before this incident happened, or were you not? And then have you moved into acting since as a result? And why didn't you choose this story to use in your previous set?
Yes, yeah, well, I think, you know, I was always a comedian before. I got into everything doing comedy, and I did a number of shows up at the Fringe, and then I won the Perrier back in 2016, and I felt like come back to the Fringe. I wanted to try something new, test myself, and I felt doing something serious was probably the biggest test that I could ever give myself, because I've just relied so much on laughs for so many years. And it's kind of interesting writing a show from a dramatic point of view, because you don't have the feedback, because if they're not laughing, well, they're not enjoying the show. If they're laughing, they're enjoying the show, but you don't get that with theatre. It's basically an hour of, are they enjoying it? I just don't know. But with this, I just felt like the situation was so truthful, and it involved a lot of people, and there was a lot of people involved, and it was very dark incident, shall we say, in my life. It felt kind of weird if I was going to just make jokes about it. Yeah. But
it's a monologue of sorts. But you play how many characters do you play?
I play a number of characters in it. I play certain friends at the time. I play her. I play my partner. I play about 5 or 6 characters. I don't sort of do like mad accents for each or anything, but I sort of like an energy thing. But yeah, I have to try and inhabit each one. And it's a tough hour. I put myself through the ringer with it and stuff. But it's been a good journey, you know.
Yeah, because a lot of people will think, oh, stand-up comedy, you can make an easy transition into a one-man show, because they're kind of the same idea.
Absolutely.
But it's not, right? It's much harder.
Yes, it is. It is. And I think with this, it's sort of, because the show is so personal, like you pluck up all these unwanted memories. You know, I use interviews from my life, from the people who were affected. So even though I'm playing fictionalized versions of people in my life, I do have interviews throughout with people who were directly involved. So my mum and my dad are interviewed because this whole situation affected them quite badly. And so it is quite real. And so sometimes you're on stage and you're like, oh, this is mad, this is personal. And it's quite hard to do.
And we've got to touch on the fact that it's called Baby Reindeer. I know you don't want to give much away, but give us a sense of why it's called that.
It's called Baby Reindeer because that was it's quite good, because this will be the hook, the whole thing, get people interested. I can't say why she called me it, but that was the nickname.
Oh, that was your nickname that you were given.
Yeah, and I never knew why for a very long time, but I did eventually find out why, and
we'll find out in the show. I mean, you won an Edinburgh Comedy Award, an Edinburgh Award, shall I say? Were you surprised at how amazing the reaction's been to it?
I was, I believed in it, and I certainly liked it. I thought, because the show has you just don't know. I've gone up, I've done shows where I thought this is going to be so well received, and then you know, for whatever reason, it's not quite as well received as you thought. And I've done shows where I'm like, this is going to be the ruin of me. I'm going to have to go back to retail. Do you know what I mean? And then you go, and then all of a sudden it's sort of, it's an overwhelming response. With this one, I just wasn't sure, because it's quite contentious, it's controversial in a way. I didn't know whether it would just be outrage. But I think because I worked very hard on the script, worked very hard trying to answer those questions within the show, I think that's why the response was positive, because I think, you know, the contentiousness is part of the situation. Like I wasn't responsible for that contentiousness. That just happened. That's because the situation was allowed to get to the point where it was completely out of control.
What's the sort of then the typical audience reaction when they leave the theatre? Is it having more questions that they want to put to you, or are they left with some answers at the end?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of stuff, because you know, it was interesting, because it went on for such a long period of time, people often come up and they say, well, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you do this? And it's quite hard to explain, because sometimes when something so irrational as stalking and harassment is happening to you, it's kind of hard to rationalize what to do. And so, yeah, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of emotion. Some people come out and they're sort of just like, oh, God, that was intense. And then other people are kind of upset. And then other people just have questions. The good thing is they do have a reaction. Usually everyone has some sort of reaction. And I think that's the main thing I try and aim for when I do a show, is that I don't want people to just leave and be like, yeah, that was a show.
That was all right,
yeah, that was all right. So,
I mean, has it been therapeutic for you as well, getting out on the stage? Has it made you, helped you get over it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's that's what I quite like about doing these autobiographical shows, and a lot of comedians, a lot of artists and writers and theatre makers do, because it helps you sort of understand it more. And there's parts of it that you're maybe slightly ashamed of, or there's parts of it that you regret. But when you explain that to an audience every night, they sort of understand and appreciate it, and you learn to sort of realise that, you know, we're all human, and you've got to go easier on yourself. And so, yeah, it's very cathartic.
I suppose, without wanting to give anything away, what were the main things you kind of learned from yourself and about other people and just life in general from that whole experience for 6 years?
The thing I learned from the whole experience really was that really, you know, I spent so long inside of it, thinking, oh, was this my fault that this situation was happening? Was it her fault that this situation was happening? Was it other people? And I realised that it was sort of neither of our faults in a way. I realised that the system itself, you know, that had allowed the situation to grow into a point where it was almost impossible to sort of comprehend. And I sort of realised that in a way we were both victims inside the narrative. And that's what I learned most from the show, that helped me have some sort of understanding of it. It wasn't to blame either of us. It was to sort of blame the situation and the system around sort of stalking and harassment for letting it happen in the way that it did.
Has it taught you to perhaps, I mean, it started with that cup of tea. Has it taught you to not be nice, or be nice because there might be an Edinburgh Award in it for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes go back and I'm like, I felt like I was very kind to a stranger, and that was the start of this sort of the complication for me. But, you know, I would hate to give the advice, just don't be nice to strangers. But always exercise caution at all times. That would be my advice.